Gary Pert was the first major casualty of Fitzroy's crippling financial crisis of the early 1990s. Fortunately for him, Collingwood was more than happy to provide a new home. He is still with the Pies today as Chief Executive. Welcome, Perty.
Hey, Mike. Good to see you.
Interesting journey for you, isn't it? My memory is that you didn't want to leave Fitzroy. We're talking at the end of 1990. You injure your knee, big knee, reconstruction, and the next time we see you is in black and white colours.
Well, I started as a Fitzroy supporter, and I grew up down at the club because Dad played there, and I'd go down into the change rooms, and the same trainers were there that looked after Dad that looked after me. And I was at the club when I was 14, playing in the scholarship squad. So it was a big. I grew up for more than 10 years at the club, and it was really unfortunate because we got into financial trouble right at a point where I blew my knee apart in a major injury and had a reconstruction. And at that point, unfortunately, the club then chose, because of their financial situation, to approach me while I literally had just got out of hospital and still on crutches, and say they weren't going to honour my contract for the next year, and they weren't in a financial position to do that. But if you agree to sign a completely different agreement, which was for a much smaller amount, then that would be how we would move forward. And that was something that ethically, at a time when I'd been at the club for 10 years, ethically, while the club, I'm expecting to support me at that time and be there to look after me, were becoming quite opportunistic. As it worked out, I had conversations with quite a few of the different clubs, and I couldn't believe it. The one club that I started, I saw as a formality, but I had no intention of going there because I really didn't like Collingwood, because they were everything as a club Fitzroy wasn't. Yeah. But when I chatted to Alan McAllister and Graham Allen, I left the meeting going, this is exactly where I want to be.
Did you ever forgive Fitzroy? I know you took offence at how they treated you. Did you ever forgive them?
I never forgave the people involved. What I did, I never really held account the supporters, because those supporters I had known for so long. I held the people that made the decision, and to be quite honest, the board, who I actually approached at one stage to say, this is not making sense to me. Guys, I know I've done damage to my knee, but I want to come back, I want to play again, and you're giving me an ultimatum, cancelling the contract. In some ways, if they're in financial trouble, they could have sat down with me and said, we can't afford to pay you next year, can we do something for the long term? I would have been 27, and I decided football is just something that was such a bad thing, and I was still going through so much pain and so difficult in the recovery. I decided to retire, and it was Collingwood that actually got me excited about football. Wow. That's the irony.
You and I go back a long way, don't we? Do you remember 1981 and a trip to Ireland, and you were part of the schoolboys team that toured Ireland?
Yeah, and that was a fantastic.
You were the shyest kid I reckon I ever saw.
Yeah, and at that time I would have been 15. Yeah, and I hadn't left Melbourne, so this was my first trip going over to Ireland. I still remember it was an amazing experience.
I must say, when we were having fish and chips at Heathrow Airport just before we boarded the plane to come home, I didn't see you as a future Collingwood CEO. Round 4, 1982. You're 16 years of age, and the Roys pick you in the first to play Sydney at the SCG. You and a bloke called Paul Roos. Made you debut the same day, and you've been best buddies since, haven't you?
I remember Roosie was on the field to start the game, I was on the bench, and Wolsey was actually, as our coach, Robert Walls, was actually sitting in the stand, in the crowd. And at that stage, all you had was a little telephone down onto the boundary line, and that wasn't even working. So I'm sitting there, and then all of a sudden, Wolsey literally yelled from the stadium, "Perty, warm up, you're on the wing," and a goal had just been scored by the Swans. So all the players were around the ground, and I ran out onto the wing, and I just waited there to see who my opponent would be. And then as they slotted into place, David Rhys-Jones come up. and I think he just got off a headbutting charge, or he'd been reported, 3 or 4 times. And as I played the game, one of the things I do remember, every single time I got a handball or a kick, he reminded me that he was going to belt me, he was going to get me. Every time I went near the ball, he was just in my ear the whole time.
You and Roosie, your mate Roosie, had what David Parkin thought was a telepathic understanding of each other. Did you know each other before you went to Fitzroy?
No, so we played in the same junior comp, but I was at a younger level than Roosie, but I knew all about him. But it wasn't really until we started playing in the seniors together. And, he was centre-half back and I was full-back, and it did get... I think I only had one player ever in my whole career where I could honestly say that we wouldn't set up a lot of things, but I knew what he was going to do. He knew what I was going to do, and it just seemed if I wanted him to lead to a certain place or cover me, he would just do it, and vice versa.
You mentioned Robert Walls, your early coach, your first coach. Do you remember a game at Waverley? Walls' coaching, you're playing for Fitzroy, you're playing Melbourne. As fierce a tongue lashing that Wolsey's ever given anyone, and you were on the receiving end.
Wolsey was very much a father figure to me. So as a young guy coming in, he literally used to pick me up from school, take me to training, bring me home. An amazing man, had an amazing impact on me as a person and as a footballer. Very much protected me. But in this particular game, we'd been beaten by 10 goals. Shocking game. Everything went wrong. And at the end of the game, the siren went, and one of the Melbourne players is 50, 60 metres out, has to have a shot for goal. So the crowd ran onto the ground, the player went back, kicked the ball, and as the ball was in the air, one of my mates who played for Melbourne said to me, "Perty, bad luck," and he put his hand out and shook my hand, Adrian Batterson. And as I shook his hand, which I saw on the tape later, literally this 60-metre bomb just missed the side of my face and went through for the 11th goal that we got done by. And in the rooms after the game, Wolsey, he knew the answer to the question, said, "Who was on the line and let that last goal go through?" And clearly I knew that was me. And I was sitting on the ground with a cordial in my hands, and my head was down, and I put my hand up. And Wolsey literally hit the cordial into my face and continued for 2 or 3 minutes to tell me how unprofessional and inappropriate and what he thought of that, and what that meant as what a reflection that was on me not to play the whole game out. And at the time, it's devastating, but you do look back on those times and actually go, but you never do that again.
Lethal, the coach, what are your memories?
I remember playing on Lethal, and that was scary. There was one game I think I was playing quite well and getting a bit cocky, and I was just sort of nudging him. It was towards the end of his career. And he just looked me in the eye and he said, "Don't do anything you're going to regret." And I don't know if you've ever looked into a shark's eyes or a snake's eyes. They're just black and lifeless. Like, they're really... If you could get me, you would kill me. You know, that sort of thing. Yeah. God, that's scary.
You played on the great full forwards, didn't you? I mean, we were blessed with the full forwards of the year in which you played full-back. I mean, Ablett, Lockett, Dunstall. Jason said to me the other day, I told him I was interviewing you, and Jason said he thought you were dirty. Now, I remember, my memory is that you were very physical when you built up and aggressive, but Dunstall said every time he went to ground, he knew that you'd fall on his knees first.
Well, no, I don't think I've ever had anyone say that I was a dirty player. I can't ever remember ever trying to fall on anyone as a player. But would I deliberately try and belt him in the back of the head, or to, crack him in the ribs and do all these different things? That was just an accepted part of the play. And I would say Jason was the most difficult full forward I ever played on. But the one thing that sticks in my mind, no matter what I did to Jason, it was a complete waste of time, because I could never, ever distract him from the focus of getting the ball and kicking goals. And in a lot of ways, that's why I respected him as the best full forward.
Did you implement the same tactics when you played on Plugger? See, I kept, the back of the head
I kept a profile on every full forward that I played on, and when I played on them, I would record, and so over time, because you're playing on the same guys every week, I would refer back to that. And the interesting thing is, the last thing you wanted to do with a Plugger or a Brian Taylor or a Mark Jackson, those types of big physical players, you had to deliberately keep them calm, because they're actually easier to play on when they were calm. When they got fired up, they tried harder and they actually did better. So it was a stupid thing to do.
Yep. One name we haven't mentioned, G. Ablett. I understand you used to say to Lee you wanted to play on him.
I probably did, because I didn't enjoy playing fullback. For 14 years, I never wanted to play fullback. That's just where I had to within the team. I wanted to be centre-half back, centre-half forward. But the only thing I used to get out of fullback was, this is a one-on-one battle with the best players in the competition, and I like pitting myself against the best.
You'll remember this day vividly, I suspect. That's you under Gaz at the MCG. Collingwood Geelong game, and when he took the one-handed quote mark unquote. I mean, I was excited as excited as anyone that day, but he didn't mark the footy, did he?
Well, technically by the rules, you got to control the ball. So I would say technically it's not a mark. But that being said, if I was an umpire, I would pay that mark.
Even though you were underneath him?
I probably dreamed of appearing in the Hall of Fame Marks of the Year at the MCG. I probably would have preferred to be holding the ball. Unfortunately, I'm sitting under someone else, but at least I got there.
After the break, dealing with Ed on a day-to-day basis. Now, after you left football, you went into, you joined Austereo. You were running Austereo when Sam Newman was on air. This is, correct me if I'm wrong here, yeah. Sam ridiculed a caller one day. You called him into the office. He thought you were going to sack him.
I called Sam in because Sam was, every game at a point, bagging the umpires. And it was a period where he was obsessed about that. I've got to say, at the time, the umpiring was really poor too. So I spoke to Sam and I said, from a broadcast point of view, we're getting a lot of feedback about the fact that have a comment about the umpires, but then you need to move on to the game. And you can't go on air unless you can guarantee me that you'll keep a balance in your views on air. And I think Sam would be the only one that would do this. He looked at me and he goes, Gary, I totally agree with what you're saying, but I cannot make that promise. So that's how Sam got taken off air. So
it was from Austereo, then to Channel 9, and then Eddie lured you to the Westpac Centre to the position of CEO at Collingwood.
Yeah.
How difficult is it managing managing the players and the staff at the most famous football club in the country?
Well, I think it's always difficult because you've got so many big personalities, and but at the same time, it's a high-performance environment as well. So you have very high expectations. Everyone's under a lot of pressure. There isn't an environment that I can think of that's under more supporter and media scrutiny. So that's a complete pressure cooker environment. So you're dealing and managing with strong personalities within that environment. So it's a challenge every day.
One of those strong personalities belongs to one Edward Maguire. Is it frustrating when you listen to, say, the Hot Breakfast, or you pick up the papers, or you listen to a radio interview and you hear him say something that's either provocative or you know is going to cause some angst for Collingwood?
No, I don't, because in some ways I know that that's his brand, because he is the president of the Collingwood Football Club, but he's also a politician. He also represents our supporters and members. He's also quite often deliberately, so he'll tell me about a lot of them. So he'll tell me, tomorrow I'm going to say these things, and I'm going to deliberately stir this up. And I think the Collingwood people love him. Our sponsors love him. Our players, everyone loves Ed from a Collingwood perspective, but I get the fact that non-Collingwood people would see that he's everything I don't like about the football or Collingwood. Be guaranteed, though, they would love to have him as their president.
One of the more intriguing relationships of my time in football was between you as CEO at Collingwood and Mick Malthouse when he was coach at Collingwood. You had a falling out, didn't you?
No, I don't see it as a falling out at all. I know that's a term that's been used. When you talk about managing strong personalities, I'm not there every day to manage Mick. I'm dealing with 15, 20 strong personalities, and Mick's one of them. I have no problem, whether it's Sam Newman or Mick Malthouse or one of the players or Nathan Buckley, to hold them account, to tell them what our expectations are in the way that they deal with sponsors or the media or what we need in the best interests of the club. But I don't see that as a breakdown in the relationship. I see that as a dynamic that needs to be in place as a club. I don't have an issue with Mick as a person while he was the coach there or afterwards.
The theory was that you had said Collingwood should canvass the field when Mick's contract as coach expired, and he took exception to that.
When we decided to contract him, and that's a board decision, I act on behalf of the board. The board decided after debate, because we were struggling on field, Mick was in a daily battle with the media. We had a lot of our supporters questioning whether we needed a change as coach.
What year are we talking about?
When this was just prior to us re-signing Mick.
For his last contract?
Yeah, for his last contract.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So in amongst that, I was part of the debate. And the debate ended up that we decided to sign him for another 2 years. That's what the board decides. I negotiate the contract. The board decides it. The board also decided, and I don't think Ed would mind me saying, I think it's pretty obvious, he championed the concept of, we're going to give Mick 2 years. We also, wouldn't it be great to have him around the club for 3 years after that? Because we want to bring in a coach in Mick's last 2 years, in Nathan Buckley. We want to train him up, and wouldn't it be great to keep Mick around as an advisor on and off the field? We could use him. And at that stage, how things were going, we had no idea whether he wanted to coach or not. He hadn't declared that. So it was I can tell you now, it was totally out of trying to look after Mick, that proposal.
Yeah.
But Mick sat down with Bucks behind a closed door, and they had a conversation, and they were the final, they're going to decide whether we do this. They opened the door, they said, we've had the chat, we're going to do it. We put it in place, and there's no doubt to me that when we gave Mick the last 2 years, that time, that lack of the fact that there was an end point to it, was a really key driver of us winning the premiership, because all of a sudden we went and got Darren Jolly, we got Luke Ball, who were available. We weren't in this constant rebuilding our list and going for young kids all the time. Mick and the list managers are like, we've got 2 years to win a premiership here. That's what Mick wants to get out of this. We won a premiership which we hadn't won for 20 years. To me as a CEO, that's my job to win that premiership.
Sure, I understand that.
Now, whether Mick was happy about it in the long run is irrelevant.
Did he stop talking to you?
No. No, because I was negotiating his contract. I was dealing with him on a daily basis.
I meant on a day-to-day basis after that arrangement was put in place. 2 years as coach and 3 years as the coaching director.
No, not at all.
Were you disappointed that he took off, that he didn't complete that second leg of the agreement?
No, not at all.
You were.
If Mick, because when Mick had some success in that period of time, it makes sense that he might say, you know what, I want to keep on coaching. And so he never ever once said to me, I don't want to continue in that role. He never come to me and said, I want you to see if you can change the contracts and for me to continue to coach on for that period of time. Because if Mick had said, at the end of the 2 years when Nathan steps in, I want to go and do media, I want to coach, it would have been a 2-minute conversation as far as I was concerned. We would have thanked him for the success he brought, everything that he'd done. We would celebrate and what he's achieved at the club, and he'd have a great relationship with the club now. What I was disappointed about is the way it finished. Not the fact that it finished, the way it finished. And not for myself. It was nothing to do with me. What I was disappointed, one, for Mick, I just didn't understand, and to this day I don't understand why it needed to finish as a bit of a circus. And Mick should be someone that we are just going to absolutely celebrate, and even if he's at another club, we've got to appreciate everything that he brought to the club. The thing that really upset me, Ed, from the day he recruited Mick to every day between that and when Mick left, Ed looked after Mick. He protected him when the media were attacking him. He protected him and supported him when the supporters were after him, or were near the bottom of the ladder, or whatever it was. Ed was there throughout that period of time. For me, the most disappointing thing was that the way it happened, that Ed would have felt disappointed and hurt by a lot of the comments prior to Mick leaving and even after Mick leaving. But, you know, that's my personal opinion. Because
do you know he's hurt?
I don't think Ed's going to come out and say that publicly. And there's no doubt to me, when you invest in people so much, they're the ones that can hurt you. And to this day, again, I don't know why that didn't finish in a really positive partnership that those two had over such a long period of time. But that's my personal view.
I want to ask you about a statement you made amongst your counterparts, the CEOs, 18 months ago at AFL House. You talked about the, quote, volcanic behaviour of the players in the off-season. Was that deliberate?
It was deliberate, and it was...
Wasn't a slip of the tongue?
No. It was part of a process to, in some ways, demand that things need to change. We were all hearing rumours about players from every club, and it was, for every time I went out socially, I would hear people talking about all these clubs and all these players, and in regards to illicit drugs. Now, these are young men that... Illicit drugs are a problem in our community, in society. There's no reason why it shouldn't affect AFL players, and so this was something I sat down with Andrew and I said, we've either got the problem that the players are using illicit drugs, or we've got a PR problem that they're not, but everyone else is talking about the fact they are. This is not good for the industry. We need to deal with it, and at that stage, the industry, I think, was largely brushing off the rumours and not following it up. There was very poor understanding and education, I think, throughout the clubs. So he encouraged me to bring it up at the CEO's conference, because this is not a Collingwood problem. This is
Well, I was just going to say that to you. The broad view was that you were raising this, yet the strongest link between players and clubs that might have been in that situation was at Collingwood.
Yeah. And Andrew Demetriou said to me, when he said, I'd like you to bring it up at the CEO's conference, but I want you to think about it. If you bring it up, it will get out and it will be perceived, and you personally will come under attack, and so will the Collingwood Footy Club. And I mentioned that to my board, and I mentioned to the board why I want to drive this, and the board totally supported. They said, as long as you're happy to take the personal hit, we as a club think it's the right thing to do. We'll take the hit as a club. And that's exactly what happened. And I think the media wanted to deal with it by going, well, let's find the players and punish them. My view was, let's, as an industry, we're the leaders in the industry, let's actually, know what we're dealing with. And now we have the clubs involved in the process. We actually have the loopholes have been closed, so we've sent a very strong message to players, not only AFL players, but players that are playing the game throughout Australia, that we won't accept it. And at the same time, one of the very strong issues that come out of it is the stress and mental health issues that players are dealing with, and we need to be giving support and understanding to the players in that circumstances, because the illicit drugs is sometimes a symptoms of some of the mental health issues.
Did you deliberately set about dismantling the so-called Rat Pack?
No, I think the Rat Pack was a name given by the guys, but it was a fun name. It wasn't a name that it's been used as, this is a group of people who are going to be resistant to the culture of the Collingwood Footy Club. Some of those players haven't been able to keep with the performance levels and requirements, haven't been picked up by other clubs, and they're now no longer at Collingwood. I think Swanee, who was part of that group, is probably the only one still at the club.
And Swanee was on thin ice at one point, wasn't he?
The way I would look at it is, Swanee got to a point where his teammates got to a point where they said, you're a champion player, we need to be seeing you at your best every week, otherwise we won't succeed, and we're all committed to this. And that come to a head prior to the finals, when the players coming into the finals wasn't a club rule. The players said, we're not going to drink for the last few weeks coming into the finals, and any player that does drink will be held accountable by the player group. The club didn't even know about that rule being set. Swanee rolled up to training on a Sunday morning. The players detected he'd been drinking. He wasn't drunk or hadn't been a problem, just literally he admitted he'd had a drink, and the players decided to suspend him for that period of time. So that's when I think, if you were to ask Swanee, he got to a point where he goes, I get it, I actually need to be doing what everyone else is doing.
Was there not a point where the board, though, considered the Swan situation and said we need to contemplate moving him on?
No. I think the way Swanee has been represented has been unfair to him, and we've seen some recent incidents to that. So Swanee is someone that he's a character. He looks different, he behaves different, he talks different. He's a character. We know and love Swanee for what he does on and off the field.
The reason why some of us had that view was because Caroline Wilson wrote a scathing piece about Swanee in The Age, and there was no response from your Ed to refute it.
Most people would say Caro seems to be obsessed with Swanee, and like we've seen in recent cases where, you know, I spoke to Caro about the fact that Swanee had talked at a function where Mick Gatto was there. The club doesn't have a problem with it at all. That was something that happened. Swanee didn't do anything wrong. He did everything that we'd expect him to do. I can tell you now, Swanee is on and off the field doing everything we want him to do.
You had no problem with Swanee being at that function?
No problem at all.
At a place owned by, was it Mick Gatto's brother?
Swanee talks at pubs, venues, restaurants. It's something that he does on a regular basis.
OK, Gary, had he gone to you and said he had that invitation, would you have counselled him not to do it?
No.
No?
No, not a problem. He is talking to a group of people, and as he says, I go to all these venues, I tell the same stories, I have a laugh, I sign some signatures. This was a restaurant full of kids and families. So after that incident that you would have described, you would have thought Swanee had gone to a bikie club or something. I received a large amount of emails and telephone calls from families, mums, saying Dane Swan was there, he was fantastic, he stopped and did photos with my kids and the family, and he is a great ambassador for the club, right? And when Swanee is going out and doing these things on a regular basis, we do not expect him to be cross-checking who is in the crowd when it's a situation like a restaurant. Like I said, if he deliberately put himself into a scenario that you would know the type of people in there and it was an extreme environment, clearly we wouldn't want him to do that.
Do you still think the Pies can win a flag within 3 years?
I have no doubt about that. If we have our best team on the field, which we haven't been able to do this year. Every time we get two back, we lose another two, and it's been very difficult. But our best team on the field is able to beat any team if we're playing at our best. I have no doubt about that.
I have 30 years of memories of you as a shy kid and a great footballer, and are now enjoying what you're doing at Collingwood. So it's been great to trawl through that, and good luck for the future, Perty.
Great, thanks, Mark.
This has been a Fox Footy production for Fox Sports.
At Fox Footy, we avoid cliches like the play.